Thank you very much, John. Good morning, everybody. It's fantastic to be here this year. I missed Data Amplified last year, which is very sad. So it's great to have been able to make it this year and to be here talking to you about the updates to the GRI taxonomy. I hate clickers, by the way. Oh yeah, this is okay. I'm not going to spend too much time actually introducing GRI. Hopefully you guys were all present on Tuesday and saw Christina speaking about GRI. But just as a very brief recap, the GRI standards are, and still are, I believe, the most commonly used sustainability reporting standards across the world at the moment. We focus very much on impact and the impact of companies on the world around them, of course. And in fact, last year we had just over 1 million downloads of the standards, which I think for a voluntary set of standards is actually a really good result, as it were, or shows just how much impact we actually have. We are, however, primarily based around PDF at the moment. But about 18 months ago, we started on our journey to actually provide a digitized version of the GRI standards and to make those available for the global community in the same way as we have done, obviously, with the PDF standards. As John just said, we went out to consultation on the draft taxonomy for GRI standards in the summer. Yeah, I'm going to present back some sort of findings from that consultation, how we've integrated some of those, the feedback we've received into the taxonomy. But I did just want to start by mentioning a couple of things about the taxonomy itself and some features of the taxonomy that maybe are a little bit different in the sense. Obviously, we are, in the first case, producing a taxonomy to provide a digital version of the GRI standards as a whole. So our aim really, and this is quite an important thing to say up front, is that we want to create a base taxonomy for GRI that captures all of the data and all the requirements of GRI reporting. That means there's some aspects of the standards which we have to integrate and we have to think about in the taxonomy design, not least, for example, that we have two different levels of accordance, reporting with GRI. We have in accordance and with reference. But we also do things with, so materiality that Richard was talking about earlier is very central to the GRI standards. We have to think about how that is handled in the taxonomy. And we also have to actually think about omissions because disclosure of omissions, what you're not reporting in your sustainability report, is a really important part of the GRI standards. Companies taking accountability for what they are not reporting at this stage and in some cases are unable to report, basically. But these are all things that we had to think about in terms of developing the taxonomy for GRI, and there were questions based or posed to the community during our public consultation about how we were doing that, basically. You may have seen this on Tuesday. I'm not going to go into too much detail here, but we also exposed for the first time that we are also intending to provide a way for companies to actually register their reports with GRI if they choose to develop digitally formatted reports on the back of GRI. We're kind of mindful, again, of how companies will adopt digital reporting, of course, and again, a little bit in reflection of what Richard was saying earlier. We're not only providing a way for companies to register their XBRL or iXBRL reports with us, but we're also thinking about how we can provide, for example, a web form to allow smaller organizations to actually key in their data directly and manually in order to get that data submitted as well. So we were posing questions about all of that in the public consultation, both the way in which we've developed the taxonomy itself, and then also some of our plans around tooling and around facilitating digital reporting as well. The consultation didn't run from July, it ran from June until August this year. And we really wanted to sort of broaden the conversation around digital reporting to make sure that we're actually also bringing in sustainability experts themselves, not just those people who are already involved in digital reporting for finance, for example, and XBRL experts as well. And in the end, we received around 50 consultation responses in total. I think it's fair to say that actually the response from the community was actually really positive. Among those who identified as sustainability specialists, for example, we had a very high level of responses saying that they believed that the standards, obviously, of the taxonomy, represented the standards in an effective way. And then among XBRL experts, very much the sort of same kind of feedback that we were capturing the requirements of the standards in an effective way. Next, I'm just going to talk around some of the topics that were fed back to us through the consultation and how we're actually responding to those topics. I would just like to say, first of all, that these are common topics. Number one, I'm not able to cover every single piece of feedback we received, clearly. But number two, I'm trying to focus on topics that we got from multiple different respondents to the actual consultation. So the first one here is actually about the way in which emissions, so GHG emissions, greenhouse gas emissions, are actually handled in the GRI taxonomy. We had quite a lot of feedback that we should align this, the way in which we were actually modeling GHG emissions with the ESRS and ISSB taxonomies. The issue here was not so much around the data that we were collecting, but actually the way in which it was being modeled. So in the draft taxonomy that we published for consultation, we were essentially using dimensions to enable reporters to be able to separate reporting under scope 1, scope 2, in some circumstances, scope 1+2, and then also their scope 3 emissions as well. So we had used a dimension to do that within the draft GRI taxonomy. But we've now disaggregated that to better align in terms of the data modeling itself with ESRS and the ISSB. So that's one change that we've made. The other change, actually, and I think this is quite interesting when we think about materiality and also about the application of sector standards, is about the way in which we actually look at the materiality assessment, and we ask reporters to report on how they conduct their materiality assessment. And materiality is really core to the GRI standards. It's kind of your starting point, and it's also the way in which you kind of link up your strategy through to your material topics, as it were. Reporters have to identify and talk about the process by which they identify their material topics. If they're using a sector standard, however, we have 4 sector standards at the moment. We also provide further guidance on what kind of topics they may want to, or they may end up having to think about in terms of their materiality assessment. That actually leads to an extra level of complexity in the taxonomy itself. Because it kind of provides some guidance and some steer to the disclosures that different reporters should be using. And in the original version of the draft taxonomy, we had separated out those the sort of reporting if you're using a sector standard from the reporting if you're not using a sector standard when talking about materiality. Unfortunately, however, the issue was that we therefore created some duplication in terms of concepts. And that didn't allow or didn't make it a particularly streamlined framework or structure to be able to report with. So we've actually, again, disaggregated that. We've pulled that into a single reporting structure around materiality as well, using a single set of concepts. And then the other change that I just wanted to talk about briefly, so in forming the draft taxonomy, we wanted to stay as close as possible to the language of the standards themselves. And sometimes that poses an issue for how you actually define your labels, how you define the names of the concepts themselves, as it were. And we had included questions as some of the labels within the draft taxonomy. And we got quite a mixed response, in fact, about the inclusion of questions. Some people really liked it, some people really did not. But in particular for Boolean data points, where obviously you're expecting a true or false kind of answer to the metric that you're reporting against, we did get some very clear feedback on that about making sure that labels are actually expressed as statements rather than as a sort of question which you provide a yes or no kind of answer to. And from a standard setting perspective, this is actually this is surprisingly interesting. I find this the more I work in XBRL. There's sort of things that sound really tiny and really boring, which turn out to be incredibly interesting when you actually try to, but this was very interesting from a standard setting point, because sometimes in order to convert a disclosure into a statement, you kind of have to force the company in a way to actually make a proactive statement about the information they're reporting. And obviously you don't want to do that because you don't want to lead people. And that's a conversation we had internally, which is quite interesting. But nevertheless, we have been through this process, and we are now expressing Booleans as statements rather than as questions. I also just wanted to mention a couple of things that we're not reflecting in the first release of the taxonomy, or we're not going to. In the first case, so the first point was around whether or not GRI should use the ISSB taxonomy, obviously, as the basis and foundation that we then add sort of GRI-specific elements to. I guess this goes back to what we were saying earlier. The GRI, or the first release of the GRI taxonomy, will be a digital version of the GRI standards themselves. So, we're going to keep everything, as it were, focused on GRI in the first release, basically. However, I think, for us, obviously, interoperability is a very important topic, that we want to be able to focus on over the coming years. Once we do have actually those kind of finalized base taxonomies of the different standards, and we can use those as a way of then being able to define in a very concrete way how they can actually be interoperable, and where, for example, there may be shared kind of concepts that, if you report under one set of standards, then you're automatically also reporting under the other set of standards. So this is not something we're going to do right now, because as I say, this is the base taxonomy for GRI, but it's certainly something that I think we're going to end up returning to in conversation over the coming couple of years. And then the other sort of broad piece of feedback we had was around the extensibility. So at the moment, the draft GRI taxonomy is closed. And obviously, for the purpose of regulators, it's very helpful to have it as being extensible, essentially. Again, this is something that we're going to continue to reflect upon, really. And again, it comes back to what is the purpose of this first release. It really is just around providing that digital version of the GRI standards themselves. And in that case, to start off with, we believe that it's right to issue a closed version of the taxonomy to reflect the fact that it is the standards, and we want to make sure that the data then that you report is also reported consistently and in a comparable kind of way. But as I say, it may well be the case that actually for use by regulators, for example, an extensible version of the GRI taxonomy would be a very good product and tool for regulators to have. So it's not something we've closed off in any sense. It's just that it's not suitable for the first release. I just wanted to very briefly reflect on something else that we kind of discovered, in a sense, through the consultation process and then also the amendments afterwards, which I said earlier that reporting, proactively reporting omissions is a feature of reporting using GRI. It's interesting, and maybe it's interesting for John and others, you guys who are actually directly involved in XBRL, to reflect upon. It's quite challenging, it turns out, to actually ask at the individual data point level if data is missing or is not reported, why that data is not reported. And originally we had created essentially a completely separate structure in the draft GRI taxonomy to be able to handle that. But unfortunately that separate structure doesn't quite work when we end up talking about dimensions. And I see John and Owen nodding to this. which means that unfortunately we have to sort of effectively bring all that information around emissions into the structure of the taxonomy itself at the level of line elements when you're using dimensions. So that's a change that we're making, which wasn't necessarily a result of the actual public consultation, but which we're working through at the moment. But I thought it was just quite an interesting kind of reflection back, basically, on how to do this. I think that might be the lunch bell, so I won't spend too much more time on this. But I did just want to also give you a quick sort of show and tell. I mentioned earlier that we are sort of providing or developing tools to allow reporters to actually register their reports with GRI. We're also developing an API at the moment. More lunch bells, to facilitate software vendors, obviously, to automate their reporting to GRI as well. And that will be, or should be available at the same time as we obviously release the final first version of the GRI taxonomy. And I mentioned earlier that, yes, we're also developing a sort of web form for manual entry by smaller organizations, or those organizations who are reporting a far more limited set of information from GRI standards to make it easy for them to actually input data as well. And just a few very brief kind of screenshots of what this looks like. I mean, I'm sure everybody has seen a web form in the past, so this is no surprise whatsoever, but obviously, one of the things that is very helpful about having this kind of tool is that once organizations have entered their information, you can see at the top right that you can also export that information either in form of an XBRL report, an iXBRL report, or indeed to Excel, if anybody still uses Excel for these kind of things. But yes, this is a sort of sneak view of some of the screens for entering information. As I say, we do expect to release this around the same time as we actually do the final version of the taxonomy itself. So these will be tools, all being well, for the community to use. And then just closing down, sort of next steps, the final kind of bits of the process in terms of releasing the first version of the taxonomy. As I say, finishing off these updates now to reflect the feedback we've received through public consultation. We're going through a long process of implementing validation checks to ensure that the requirements of reporting under GRI are also captured in the taxonomy itself. We're aiming for a first release around January now. That has moved back a little bit. We did hope to release before the end of the year, but it'll probably be the start of next year now. And then we obviously move into our sort of implementation phase, and we're in particular looking to run a number of pilots with reporters, but also obviously software vendors who want to integrate the GRI taxonomy into their products. So I think that's it. Lunch is calling, but thank you very much for your attention. Happy to take any questions now, or you've got my contact details there for afterwards as well.
Thank you very much, Piers. Is there a question or two? Yes. We'll just wait for the microphone so we can record it. 1 second, sorry. Sorry, 1 second, just wait for the mic. It's coming.
I like the enthusiasm. That was great. Yeah.
You have export XBRL after filling the portal, but it is possible to send an ESSP and EFRAG, the same, the different XBRL.
I'm so sorry.
But only your own XBRL or XBRL for ESSP and XBRL for EFRAG. It's the same way. Is it possible?
So this will be the discussion after lunch.
Yes, okay.
So the interoperability between these taxonomies is a key question.
Yeah.
And I think, Piers, you probably will go back to your slide that said that's not being your focus for your first release.
No, exactly. So the first release, as I say, is actually focused on, it's right at the start, so I'm not gonna go all the way back, sorry guys. But the focus for us right now is to say that we have the PDF standards, and those are used across the world. We need to have a digital version of those standards that capture all the metrics and all the actual requirements for reporting. How that then fits together with the ISSB and with ESRS, that's what we need to focus on now in the coming years, because we have that basis for comparison now. You know, previously we didn't have that basis for comparison at the digital level. And each of the standards bring their own separate thing, right? They each bring their own character and their own have their own kind of uses, as it were. So now we need to be able to use those foundations to be able to understand what interoperability really looks like.
More on that after lunch. Is there another question? Or would you like to all eat? Okay, please join with me in thanking Piers for an excellent presentation.